My father stood up at the head of the table, tapped his wine glass, and smiled the way he always did when he was about to say something he thought was generous. "We're taking the whole family to Napa for my retirement celebration," he announced. 5 days, wine country, the whole thing. Everyone cheered. My sister reached across the table and squeezed her husband's arm. My brother's kids started asking if there was a pool. My mother dabbed at her eyes like she was watching a movie. I picked up my fork and waited. "Harriet," my father said, looking directly at me, "we'll need you to stay behind and handle things at the house." The table went quiet for exactly 1 second. That 1 second where everyone heard it, processed it, and then collectively decided not to acknowledge it. "Handle things," I repeated. "The Hendersons next door are having some work done, and we need someone to be available in case there are questions about the property line, and your grandmother's nurse takes Thursdays off, so someone needs to be there for her medication. And the cats." "The cats," I said. "They don't do well in a boarding facility. You know that." My sister was suddenly very interested in her bread roll. I was 31 years old. I had a master's degree in accounting and a job I actually showed up to every day. I had driven 4 hours to be at this dinner, and I was being asked to stay behind to handle a property line dispute and 2 aging Persian cats while my entire family flew to Napa Valley to celebrate my father's retirement. "Of course," I said, "I'll take care of it." And I smiled. I smiled the way you do when you already know exactly what you're going to do next. Let me back up, because this didn't happen in a vacuum. My father built a mid-sized commercial real estate firm over 30 years. Not huge, but substantial. The kind of business that owns a few office parks in the suburbs, manages some retail strip centers, and keeps a small but loyal roster of clients who've worked with him for decades. He was good at it. He was charming and careful, and he knew how to read a room. What he wasn't good at was treating his 2 children equally. My brother Elliot got summers working in the firm starting at 16. He got his college paid for without a conversation. He got a car for his 21st birthday and a down payment loan for his first house that was quietly forgiven 2 years later. I only know because I saw the internal accounting when my father asked me to help reconcile some family records one Christmas. I got a partial scholarship in the expectation that I would figure out the rest. I did. I waitressed through undergrad, took out loans for grad school, and paid them off myself. I didn't resent it exactly. I just filed it away as information about how things worked in my family. When I got my CPA license, my father took us all out to dinner. He ordered a nice bottle of wine and said he was proud of me. Then he asked if I'd be willing to take a look at the firm's books as a favor, because his accountant had retired and he hadn't found a replacement yet. That was 3 years before the Napa announcement. As a favor turned into every quarter. Every quarter turned into me building out a full set of reconciled financials, tracking depreciation schedules, managing vendor relationships for tax purposes, and fielding calls from his property managers about expense categorization. I was not paid. I was occasionally taken to lunch. When I mentioned gently that what I was doing was essentially a full part-time job and that I should probably be compensated, my father said, "Your family, this is what family does." When I mentioned it a second time, my mother called me and said I was stressing him out. I stopped mentioning it, but I kept doing the work, and I kept very, very careful records of everything I touched. The retirement dinner was on a Saturday in March. By Monday morning, I had driven home, fed my own cat, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat down at my kitchen table with a folder I'd been quietly building for 14 months. It started with something small. A vendor payment in the fall 2 years ago, a landscaping company that I'd processed an invoice for, routine stuff, except that when I went to verify the address for a 1099 form, the address didn't match any registered business in the state. I checked the EIN. It came back to a holding entity that my father had registered 18 months earlier under a name I didn't recognize. I didn't say anything. I just noted it. Then there was a consulting fee, a recurring monthly payment to an LLC that I couldn't find any contract for. I asked my father's office manager about it, and she said it was something my father handled directly. She didn't have documentation, normal enough for small firms, except the payments had been running for 2 years at $4,000 a month, and when I traced the LLC back through state filings, it was registered to an address that turned out to be a UPS store in a strip mall 40 minutes from our house. I noted that too. I won't walk through every thread I pulled, because there were a lot of them and most of them were boring in the way that financial crime is always boring. It's just numbers, just patterns, just the same quiet wrongness repeating itself in the ledger. But the picture that emerged over 14 months of careful, methodical documentation was this. My father had been diverting money from his firm for at least 6 years. Not huge amounts at first. The kind of thing that looks like rounding errors or miscategorized expenses if you're not paying close attention. But it had grown. Payments to entities he controlled, expenses that didn't correspond to real services, revenue that appeared in internal records but not in the tax filings his accountant had been signing off on. His accountant, I should mention, had retired very comfortably. By my best estimate, the total over 6 years was somewhere between $800,000 and $1.1 million. I couldn't be certain of the upper bound without access to records I didn't have. But I had enough. More than enough. I had been sitting on this information for 14 months because I didn't know what to do with it. He was my father. My mother didn't know. I was almost certain of that. She wasn't capable of the particular kind of deliberate ignorance this would require. My brother probably didn't know either. The people who might be harmed were his clients, his investors, the IRS, and technically the integrity of the financial system, which sounds abstract until you remember that it isn't. And then he stood up at the dinner table and told me to stay home and watch the cats. I'm not saying that's what made up my mind. I think my mind had been made up for a while. But it clarified things. I spent the 2 weeks before Napa getting my documentation in order. I printed nothing. Everything stayed digital, organized, time-stamped, backed up in 3 places. I wrote a clear, factual summary of what I'd found, attached the supporting records, and had it reviewed by a friend from grad school who now works in forensic accounting. She read through it over a weekend and called me on Sunday night. "Harriet," she said, "this is real." "I know. Are you sure you want to do this?" I thought about the lunch my father had taken me to when I first raised the question of compensation. He'd ordered a Cobb salad and talked for 40 minutes about how family businesses operated differently, how you couldn't put a price on trust, how one day this would all matter to me in ways I couldn't see yet. He'd picked up the check and called it a treat. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure. My friend connected me with a colleague who specialized in tax fraud referrals. I'm not going to say exactly how the process worked because it's complicated and frankly boring, but there is a formal mechanism for reporting tax fraud to the IRS. It's called a whistleblower submission, and under certain circumstances, the person who reports it is entitled to a percentage of the collected proceeds. I didn't know this going in. My friend's colleague explained it to me. I filed everything 10 days before my family left for Napa. Then I drove to my parents' house, fed the cats, waited for the grandmother's nurse on Thursday, and answered one mildly annoying question from the Henderson family about whether a drainage easement applied to a new fence they wanted to build. It did not, but I told them they should check with a property attorney to be sure. It was a quiet week. I read 2 books and reorganized my father's filing system while I was there, which felt like a small, private joke. My family came back from Napa on a Friday afternoon. My mother texted me photos the whole time, wine tastings, a long table at some vineyard restaurant, my nieces holding bunches of grapes. My brother sent me a picture of a hotel room view with the caption, "You would have loved this," which landed in a way he didn't intend. I sent back hearts. I'm good at that. The IRS doesn't work fast. I want to be clear about that because I think people imagine it like a switch you flip and then things happen. It's not. There's a review process, a verification process, an investigation that can take months or longer depending on the complexity of the case and the resources allocated to it. I knew this going in. I had prepared myself for a long wait. What I hadn't fully prepared for was how normal everything would feel in the meantime. My father retired officially in June. There was a party at their house. Catered, about 60 people, very tasteful. I attended. I helped my mother arrange the flower order. I talked to my father's former colleagues about their grandchildren and their golf handicaps. My father gave a speech about legacy and hard work and the importance of integrity. I stood at the back of the room and drank a glass of sparkling water and felt something I can only describe as very, very still. The investigation took 11 months. I know because I was counting. The call I got wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday morning in May. I was at my actual job, the one that paid me, reviewing a client's depreciation schedule. My phone showed a number I didn't recognize, and something in me knew before I even picked up. It was a representative from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, following up on some clarifying questions about my submission. We talked for about 20 minutes. She was professional and matter-of-fact, and didn't tell me anything about the status of the investigation, which I understood was protocol. She thanked me for my thoroughness. I went back to my depreciation schedule. 3 weeks later, my mother called me, crying. There had been a visit. Federal agents. They'd come to the house, my parents' house, the house I grew up in, with a warrant. My father had been questioned. His firm's records had been subpoenaed. His personal financial accounts had been flagged for review. I don't understand, my mother kept saying. I don't understand what's happening. I sat on the floor of my apartment. I don't know why the floor, it just seemed like the right place, and I told my mother that I loved her. I told her to call a family attorney. I told her not to let my father make any statements without a lawyer present. I told her to write down everything she could remember about the visit while it was still fresh. I did not tell her what I knew. I'm not proud of that part. I want to be honest about it. There was a period of several months where my mother was frightened and confused and reaching out to me for support, and I gave her what support I could while also being the reason, the direct, intentional reason, that her world was collapsing. I have thought about this a lot. I don't have a clean answer for it. I think I believe that telling her would have meant she'd warn my father, and warning my father would have meant evidence would disappear. I also think that on some level I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. Both things were true. My father was formally charged 14 months after I filed. Wire fraud, tax evasion, filing false returns, 6 counts in total. His attorney negotiated. These things usually do get negotiated, apparently. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts and agreed to full restitution plus substantial penalties. The sentencing was on a Wednesday. I did not attend. I found out later from my brother, who had, by this point, figured out that I was involved. Though we haven't talked about it directly, and I suspect we won't for a long time, that my father received 30 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay back $1.2 million in restitution and penalties. His firm was dissolved. The assets were liquidated to cover what they could. My mother had known nothing. This was confirmed eventually, and she was not implicated. She sold the house and moved into an apartment 40 minutes from where I grew up. I help her when I can. We talk on the phone most Sundays. We don't talk about my father much. The IRS Whistleblower Program awards between 15 and 30% of collected proceeds in qualifying cases. I won't tell you the exact number I received because it feels wrong to make that the point. What I will say is that it was significant. Enough to pay off my remaining student loans. Enough to put a down payment on an apartment. Enough to sit in my living room on a Tuesday evening and feel for the first time in a long time like I was standing on solid ground. I think about the dinner a lot. The retirement dinner, the Napa announcement, my father's smile when he told me to stay home and handle things. I don't think he thought of it as cruel. That's the thing I've had to sit with. I think he had simply organized the world in a way where I was useful in certain ways and not important in others, and he'd been doing it for so long that it had stopped occurring to him to question it. The cats needed someone. The property line needed someone. I was there, I was capable, and I didn't cost anything. What he didn't account for was that I had been paying attention for 3 years. That every invoice I processed, every reconciliation I ran, Every quarterly report I produced for free had given me a complete picture of his finances, far more complete than he realized. He handed me the keys to his records and called it family, and then he left for Napa and assumed I would feed the cats and wait. I did feed the cats, both of them, every day, exactly on schedule, and then I went home and I let the truth do what it does, which is to say, I let it be true. My grandmother's nurse, for what it's worth, was lovely. We had coffee on Thursday morning, and she told me about her garden, and I told her a little about what I did for work. She said it sounded important, keeping track of things so carefully. I told her it had its moments. I don't want a relationship with my father when he gets out. I've thought about this carefully, and I think it's okay to say it plainly. I don't. What he did to his clients and investors was wrong. What he did to me, years of unpaid work, of being the one left behind, of being treated like a resource rather than a person, that was also wrong, in a quieter way. I'm not interested in sorting through which wrong was bigger. I'm interested in my own life now. My actual job where I'm paid a fair salary and have health insurance and occasionally get thanked for my work. My apartment with the good kitchen. My own cat, who is nothing like the Persians and deeply unimpressed by all of this. My sister didn't speak to me for 8 months. She has recently started texting again, careful, neutral things, checking in. I respond. I don't know what we are to each other anymore, but I'm willing to find out slowly. My brother has not called. I understand that too. My mother and I have Sunday phone calls. Last week, she told me about a book club she'd joined and a woman she'd met there who'd also started over in her 50s. She sounded like herself, almost. She sounded like someone who was learning to have a smaller, quieter life and finding, against all expectation, that it fit. I think about telling her someday. Maybe when my father has served his time and the whole thing feels less like an open wound. Maybe not. I don't know yet. What I know is this. I stayed behind. I fed the cats. I handled things. I just didn't handle the things he expected me to.